Hello and welcome to our TB Readers question and answer session. We're just finishing our reading period for Mountains Beyond Mountains, a biography of Paul Farmer by Tracy Kidder. I, for one, have really enjoyed reading this book, and we're here with Dr. Joia Mukherjee. Dr. Mukherjee is a physician, educator, and activist. She's currently serving as senior advisor to the CEO, clinical and academic strategy at Partners in Health, where from 2000 to 2025, she served as chief medical officer. Joia coordinates and supports PIH's efforts to provide high quality, comprehensive healthcare to the poorest and most vulnerable. She is an associate professor at Harvard Medical School and on the faculty at the University of Global Health in Rwanda. Dr. Mukherjee teaches infectious disease, global health delivery, and human rights to health professionals and students from around the world. She's the author of Introduction to Global Health Delivery, Practice, Equity, and Human Rights, a textbook published in 2017 by Oxford University Press. And her scholarship focuses on health delivery, universal health coverage, and human rights. Joia is a mother and a singer. Joia, we are so excited to have you here, especially as such an important person in PIH's work and mission and the development of PIH as we read about this book that takes place mostly at the very beginning
Mm,
of PIH and how much amazing work you all have done.
mm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. And we would be, nowhere without our TB fighters, nerve fighters. Poor people around the world want to raise their voice and do often raise their voice for healthcare as a basic right, but they need allies. I think if there's anything we learned at Partners in Health after the book Mountains Beyond Mountains was written, was the power really of the HIV treatment access movement, which was people from the global north and the global south standing in solidarity. And it, changed the world. And that's the kind of movement we need now for TB, but also for healthcare and dignity as a basic human right. And we see those rights being eroded in this country and around the world. So we're so grateful to have this real army of people who are fighting for rights and justice.
We would be nowhere without medical experts and global health experts to kind of guide our advocacy. And that's one of the reasons we love to have you here is because we learn so much about how to act in solidarity and how to advocate from people who are on the ground doing this important work. Um, and I love that you talk about standing in solidarity and amplifying the voices of people whose voices aren't always readily accessible, right? Or who aren't being amplified by our current system.
Yeah.
Um, and we're going to talk about that, I think, a little bit today about
Right.
how we can do more of that and how PIH does that. Um, One thing that I wanted to ask, um, a huge part of this story is about the way that drug-resistant TB treatment was considered impossible in poor countries during the 90s, and that it became possible through determined effort and advocacy. What other impossible problems do you think could be tackled in our lifetime, and what do you think it would take to get to that point?
I mean, I think one of the most impossible and still shocking to me is malnutrition or starvation. Around the world, 16,000 kids die a day of, being undernourished, and they often die of diseases like tuberculosis, um, but also malaria, pneumonia, diarrheal disease. And it's just really simply a lack of food, period. And there are even new studies, and we've known this for a long time. And you guys read about it in Mountains Beyond Mountains about the food fight, just saying that tuberculosis patients need food. That seemed so radical, and people wanted to have a randomized controlled trial. If you see some of these patients, I mean, they're skeletons. Like, there's no doubt they need food. And yet, um, that somehow is considered outside of our lane. We have to always be outside the lane, right? Because our patients, the poor, are telling me, I'm hungry, my kids are hungry, there's a famous Haitian saying, which is, about futility in general, but I think they say in the book, like to have tuberculosis treatment without food is like washing your hands and wiping them in dirt. And so um, the reason we focus a lot on tuberculosis is because it is such the model disease of poverty. If you have a decent place to live with good ventilation, if you have a good diet, you will not contract TB and you will not die of TB. And so there was a recent study in India showing just people who got rations versus not did better, like significantly better. So if we were to, as a globe, say, hunger is not acceptable in the 21st century, and we could do it through a variety of ways, have what we call blanket feeding for children, which is what we have in the United States with food stamps and WIC. And you see those being eroded. School feeding, feeding of the elderly. There are ways that that could be done. And my colleague Michael Rich would also say, switching to a plant-based whole food diet because meat is so expensive and also disruptive to the environment. But there are ways, we could extend what we do for malnourished children and adults that would help people to be resilient against infectious diseases and other medical problems. And so I think that's something that seems like impossible because it's a vast, vast, vast problem. But we certainly globally have the resources to do that. I one time back of the envelope calculated for $15 billion a year, we could provide blanket feeding for kids under 5 with nutritionally fortified peanut butter or plumpy nut. So it's totally possible, but it's a lack of will, the otherization of the very people who are hungry. Um, and it's just, you see it in the US as well.
Yeah, that's that's a really great answer because I mean, it's great for a variety of reasons, but one thing that struck me is how we have seen that as we've advocated for access to medicine, access to food is often pushed back as unessential, even now, even as we know that it's essential.
Yeah.
Um, that it can be so much more difficult to get food than it is to get
Yeah.
medicine. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that's, you know, people saying, well, if someone is sick, they could get me sick, but if someone is hungry, that doesn't affect
Yeah.
me, you know?
Yeah. And that's the solidarity. Thank you so much for saying that, Caroline, because I think that is the difference between sort of pity, which is, appropriate. We should pity people as well, but and solidarity, right? I but also the let me say ethnocentric nature of some of the ways we think about infectious disease is that we're going to treat it so it doesn't get to us. It's probably not going to get to us, to be frank. Like we can keep talking about, oh, it's transmissible, but at the end of the day, like I've been heavily exposed to tuberculosis all my adult life. I've never gotten sick because I have adequate nutrition, I have a place to live, I have access to health care, like all of these things. So yeah, if we always make the argument that it's security for us, to me, I've never liked that argument because it builds on fear of the other. It builds on fear of poor people. It builds on racism. It builds on ethno-nationalism. So if we say, oh, we do this because it's better for our security, that assumes that other people are bad for our security, and that is not solidarity. That really is the wrong. So I've always been against that argument. Sometimes we at PIH, we resort to that argument. You try to throw a bunch of things on the wall and see what sticks, see what works with people. But this group, the TB readers, the TB fighters, the nerd fighters, like you guys are smarter than that. And I think that's in general, a losing strategy when it comes to building a movement and building solidarity. It might work with, to get some money or work to think of biohazards or whatever, but internally among our family, we don't want to otherize people as a threat to build a movement.
That is a really helpful perspective to take, to consider as we're trying to advocate. Is, what other messages might we be sending as we
Mhm.
try to uh, get means, get the resources necessary to help people? Are we also undercutting that effort?
Yeah.
Um,
It so
yeah.
depends on the audience, can I just say, and what I really
Mhm.
respect about all the work we're doing together as a community on the advocacy front is we're trying to bring the messages that most work for the people we're bringing it to. And there are, people across the political spectrum who are more worried about their own safety and security than they are about the suffering of people, in some other countries. So again, if that message works for a particular politician or staff, or like, I'm not against using that message, but I think internally we should know that people are people, that these threats you know, to our community anywhere is a threat to us because of justice and indignity. It's not really a threat to our like safety in that way.
Yeah. It's we're in kind of a difficult moment for global health funding right now. I shouldn't
Yeah,
say
yeah,
kind of. We're in a
yeah.
really kind of scary moment for global health funding. Have you lived through any moments in global health that feel like what we're experiencing now?
All
And
of
what
them.
what seems different
Yes,
and
all of
similar?
them. So, look, when Mountains Beyond Mountains came out, um, we had not won any big battles for funding, right? And at that time, there were 26 million people on the planet who were living with HIV, and not a one of them had access to treatment. Now, remember that book, I think, first came out, first edition was 2001 ish. And we had full, treatment, good treatment that brought people from dead to living and gave people a 2-year death sentence to a long and productive, happy life in 1996. So that's 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. Those 7 years, 8,000 people died every day of HIV without the access to treatment that we had. So many people died before that, both in the United States and Europe, as well as in the developing world. But that dichotomy was brutal, right, to watch. And we would run around, all of us, and I mean we people, who are living with HIV, people who are the allies of people living with HIV, people in, like Saki Ahmed, a total hero of the HIV movement, who famously said, as a middle class person, he could have gotten antiretrovirals. And he said, no, I'm not taking them till everyone in my country can get them for free. He almost died like multiple times. So that time, the blindness to the suffering in a pandemic of other people, and there was a crisis of orphaning. Children were being left orphans. When I worked in Uganda in the mid 90s, there were so many children who were orphans, and you know their parents had died of AIDS. You know, and there was, we had the treatment. We had the treatment. So it was a huge moral failing those years. Um, and that changed because of activism, people living with HIV and their allies who said, no, we are not going to accept this totally split world. Um, and so that was as challenging, right? And in fact, in some ways, it was more challenging because we had nothing. We had nothing. Like in many countries, between colonialism and the structural adjustment imposed by the World Bank and the IMF, there were no health systems at all. So even ministers of health of goodwill had nothing to work with, right? Not only did they have nothing to work with in terms of HIV, which was, the top killer of adults, and tuberculosis, but they had nothing to keep the lights on, to have running water, to have staff. So the global health movement really is thanks to AIDS activism. And now, of course, the threat is that that money is clawed back. This is a difficult moment. And yet, what we have built together exists, right? So there are clinics, and many, not all, do have power and water, um, and there have been, thousands of people in Africa, Latin America, Haiti that have been, and Asia that have been trained properly, have used the tools. Governments have made a bigger commitment. So it's a bad moment, but we have, over the last 25 years, built a tremendous and successful care delivery platform across the world. So now our job is to say, what will it be to maintain that and grow from that? But we're not going to go back. I mean, we can't. We're not going to go back to 8,000 people dying a day from, untreated HIV. So I think those of us who lived through those dark, dark times know there is worse out there. But this is, not to minimize this moment, which is also very difficult.
That's a really hopeful kind of perspective and statement I for a time when a lot of people, I mean, I'm really young. I was a little kid in the 90s,
Yeah.
right? So I don't remember that.
Mm.
And so this moment feels real scary for me, but to hear like we aren't going back to a time when we had no system, and that we can move forward from what we have, and that we're better off now than we were then in a really significant way is that's really helpful to hear.
I'm
Uh,
glad. I mean,
Thank you for
it
that.
really is true. I mean, and just some of the crazy, these people are crazy, they don't understand, but we have won major battles and saved, millions, literally millions of lives because of this movement. And we have to take it seriously to keep pushing forward. But on the other hand, it isn't, we have achieved a lot, really a lot,
Mhm.
really a lot.
What would you say is the most surprising or exciting development in Partners in Health's history in your time there? Um, and what do you hope that we can achieve in the next few decades?
I think the most exciting, I just had a lot of our clinical leaders from the US, who are mostly from abroad, but working now in the US as our leadership team, um, at my house for my transition from chief medical officer to senior advisor, and welcoming our new amazing chief medical officer, Dr. Sturman Toussaint, who's originally from Haiti and works in Liberia. And I think for me, one of the most exciting things is to see how committed so many people are to their own countries, to staying and fighting. Our team in Haiti just blows me away. We have 7 residency training programs, young doctors signing up to work in these rural areas despite gang violence, now with extraordinary tools to be pediatricians and surgeons and emergency medicine doctors. We didn't have that kind of workforce. We see our University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda graduating their first class of physicians who are committed to working in rural areas. We see, professionalized cadres of community health workers from Peru. I just talked to and heard about the great work of community health workers in Peru to Lesotho. So to me, I'm always excited about the people who are doing this work, that it doesn't depend on, you know, Americans or Europeans, but the local people are so deeply committed to doing this work and are in it to win it. They're not gonna, you know, so we have to just make sure that they can do their jobs. I love taking care of patients. I have lots of patients I'm very close to, and yet I think for many years as chief medical officer, my main job was to be, you know, the accompanitor and cheerleader of our clinical team, from community health workers to nurses to pharmacists and doctors. And, you know, these are just remarkable people who are doing the work every day. And I think that's the most excited I am, is to say, we have the benefit of having a voice in the most powerful country in the world, the United States. Um, and we can lift our voices on their behalf, to make sure that they have what they need, to continue to care for people who are suffering. So I think that's always my biggest excitement, is the amazing people who are doing this work, for the patients and vulnerable people that we care about.
Yeah, they're kind of the unsung heroes of
Absolutely.
this work, right? There's so much that's being done
Right.
by these individuals who are learning these important skills and taking them into their communities and helping
Yeah.
so many people.
Yeah. And I think what I've seen is the brain drain. You can combat the brain drain by giving people, obviously, decent, adequate salary, but also the tools that they need, because they go to school and they really want to, they want to work. They want to care for people. But if they are a pharmacist and they get to put in a pharmacy and there's nothing there, like, they lose hope. So our work to raise money, raise attention, make sure that there's, there's work that can be done, like, that's what really, um, will keep people in their job and doing the work that they really love and care about.
Yeah, and that they can do better than anybody else, being like,
Exactly.
yeah, being experts
Yeah,
in language and culture
exactly.
and,
Yeah.
knowing their patients personally or knowing their
Yeah.
community
Yeah.
personally.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. I literally had a question about how PIH strengthens and empowers healthcare workers that you're amazing. Already answered it.
Well, I mean, I can answer a little bit more detail because it is a great question. I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. It's what I'm super passionate about, but also I would say that, like, what we do is formal training. So because again, I have so much faith in this community, I would say let's have discernment. When people talk about training health workers, are they just taking people to a training in a hotel and people drink PowerPoint and learn about something and get snacks? Or are they doing day-to-day mentoring at the bedside, academic lectures? That's what I learned from my colleagues. That's what they wanted. Real hands-on mentored training, the kind of training that I had 9 years of, from medical school to residency to fellowship. And when we hear that there's a training program, we need to be discerning. What does that look like? Is it people with their patients, in front of patients, or is it something really different than that? Is it just a kind of, you know, uh, hotel-based training that's not hands-on? Because those trainings waste a ton of money.
Mm, that's good to know. Yeah, that's one thing that I have always admired about Partners in Health is how it's about giving power and resources into the hands of people who are already doing phenomenal work and amplifying and lifting them, rather than making it, um, all of these people are going to come over from another place and, do it all themselves, or think that they're making a big and important difference when in fact there are people already there who are working and doing such important work that we can be
Mhm.
lifting, right? Which
Yeah,
is what PIH is so good at doing.
yeah, yeah. And I think, again, you guys are just such a great, great community because I think you understand that. I was reflecting a little bit with our friend John Green about like what is it about this generation that's different? There is sort of more of an appreciation of the solidarity that we need. I don't know what it is. Like maybe it's you guys see reality in a way. I don't know, but it's really beautiful and we're so grateful for it.
Thanks. We love working with Partners in Health, and we're excited and privileged to have contacts with Partners in Health and other organizations that can give us so much direction. And we're just, a bunch of people trying our best, without formal training.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and you bring so much to the table in that.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of the book, what do you think that Tracy Kidder could have spent more or less time on in accounting PIH's story and development?
I mean, look, it's a wonderful book. It's given us a ton of, support from around the world. We're very fortunate for that book and also for Tracy's solidarity. I mean, he was on our board for a long time. I think he spent so much time getting to know Partners in Health and the sites. Um, I think in a way, what I always think is more nuanced than you can show in the book is the deep expertise that our local staff has. I think it is, Paul was, I even have a hard time talking about him in the past tense, but an amazing, amazing person. Um, and yet there, it, it's always easier for, I think one thing that makes the book very, very popular is the idea that this one person had this quest, but, you know, he had, and Paul would be the first to say this, there were so many people from, local people, Madame Mac, we were talking about just a community member in Conj who was his really go-to person, um, to, to look at inequality and to be clear with and that's one person. The other are some of the nurses, social workers that were there from the beginning. So I think just it's hard to portray the teamwork that has always been critical to Partners in Health in that book. And again, I don't fault, I definitely don't fault the writer for that. I think it's a hard story to tell, but I think that nuanced version of who the real day-to-day heroes are is a little bit hard to sometimes discern, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's hard to tell a story with as many characters, right?
Yes.
That if you can focus in on the story of one person, sometimes that's just an easier book to write
Yeah.
and easier story to comprehend. But I
Yeah.
love that nuance that you're adding for us, because that was a question that some of the people had in our discussion was, wow, this seems like a lot of Paul doing a lot of things
Yeah.
and like not as much as we would
Yeah.
expect of all of these other, like this whole team.
Yeah.
Not that they
Yeah.
weren't there, but that nuance that you're describing
Yeah.
was, I think we noticed when we
Yeah.
read the book.
Well, and again, I'm glad you noticed because that just shows a kind of discernment. The book is a compelling narrative of a person and it does, help. open the door to a lot of people who are not necessarily super sophisticated about global health, but it's not for those of us, including all of you in the know, um, yeah, you see that, well, it can't be one person. There's no I in team, right? And so, yeah, so I'm glad that was noticed, but I think the audience of that book was not necessarily all of you. It was people who are a lot less knowledgeable about what it takes to do global health, introducing the idea that, you know, everybody should have dignity and health, and some of those people, some of the people who are less involved in the movement were just blown away by the even notion of that. So it served a specific purpose. But when people would say to Paul, I read your book, he said, do you mean pathologies of power? Because he wanted us to be more discerning. He wanted us to read the more scholarly books. Um, so it's good that you noticed. It shows a kind of discernment and a knowledge of the work.
We love our TB readers chat. There's so many thoughtful voices. It's
Great. Great.
really great. If anybody's listening who's not part of the book club, join it. It's great. We're having a great time on there. Um, and speaking of this team that you're describing, this kind of not always developed in the book story of the hard work that was being done by so many other people. One thing that was noticed and seemed striking for a lot of people as we read was the long hours and low pay that PIHers were dealing with in the beginning.
Mm.
The really hard pace and difficult work that was being done. How do you feel about those working conditions in those early days? And do you feel like it was the right move at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, startups, like even if you look at a venture startup, right, there's a scrappiness, which is really important, right? And you don't know where it's going to go. And so you have to, in a way, prove some principles to get going.
Mm.
So, we're doing that just like, a new startup would in science, or a new startup would in, um, some tech, but with sort of basic human rights, which, nobody really thought were fully achievable in certain places. So I think that is part of the story, and it's certainly true. I think we've all worked to professionalize in a good way our workforce, whether it's, cleaners or drivers or physicians, nurses. I think it's a really important thing to think that this work is not just a hobby. Paul wrote about this too. It's a profession. And, why should someone be paid a decent salary to work with very poor people? You shouldn't only be able to support your family and send your kids to school, whatever, if you're in private practice for very wealthy people. One of our psychiatrists that we worked with years ago in Peru, who took care of our MDR patients from a psychiatric standpoint and a psychological standpoint. He made his money taking care of very elite people with like anxiety. And so he could volunteer with us, which is okay. But
Yeah.
I think I want to make sure that people can have a decent life, because at the end of the day, I feel like we're fighting for people to have a decent life. Whether it's a community health worker being able to send their kids to school, or, a farmer that can have enough security that once in a while they can take a day off, or, spend a day with their family. I mean, these are basic pieces, like leisure is a human right, getting a fair pay for work is a human right. And so I think we've done a decent job. I think we're still failing with community health workers, because it's an interesting mix. Like we have partners in health, community health workers that get paid in general. But um, as governments take that over, it's very hard for them to take such a big number of, let's say in Rwanda, 70,000 community health workers on payroll. And so, and that's because of external constraints, because of the World Bank, because of the IMF, this kind of thing. So we're still fighting for that cadre to be remunerated appropriately. Um, and so that's still a big struggle. But I think it's not sort of surprising to me that like PIH started in this scrappy way. I think a lot of organizations, both private and philanthropic and charitable, do. And over time, we've tried to say, this is people's life's work, and we definitely want to support them.
Yeah. And you have to, right?
You
If you
have to.
want people to be able to stay and continue to work and do
Yeah.
this important work, making
Yeah.
it possible and sustainable is critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
that's one thing that you mentioned about, these are human rights, and this shouldn't be something that we have to fight so hard to establish that everybody should have, was one thing that the book really spoke to me. Like, this is Mountains Beyond Mountains is now one of my personal top favorite books of all time.
Oh,
Um,
good. Good.
and one of the reasons that it is because of this unrelenting and passionate demand that every person should have, like that every person ought to have these human rights, and that what we think of as healthcare or what we think of as human rights, we need to push that boundary further and expand
Yeah.
what we consider to uh, default or what we take for granted. Because Paul is constantly pushing back in the book against people who take for granted that it's okay that this kind of inequality exists. Right? There's a
Yeah.
there's a doctor that he talks to in Haiti who's going home and expresses how much relief, I'm going home. And for Paul, it's like, how are you so okay with going back to this place and leaving people who need you? And why can't we be enthusiastic about continuing to push for this? Uh, there's so many different times in the book where we kind of come up against this
Mhm.
wall of somebody doesn't feel like people ought to have this right guaranteed, and PIH pushing to try to change the narrative about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I think for me, like the thing I'm always most celebratory and in awe of is because for many of our health professionals, doctors and nurses, they're not necessarily even from the rural places that we work. They may be from the country, but their families are in the city. So, I think it's always like really amazing to me that that we have such talented people who commit the way they do to the work.
So you mean that within the places where PIH has gone and gone to support, that there's still that sacrifice being made by the
Absolutely.
health workers there, of
Daily,
course.
daily. So, if you're in Nano, Malawi, very few of the doctors and nurses, pharmacists, like the professionals are from there. Once in a while, but most of them are from the capital. Um, so it's they're making a sacrifice to uh, to be where they are, and often they're commuting back and forth to the capital, but they love the work. They care about the people they serve.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Yeah. It's
it's
probably a cut in
really
pay also from what they could be making in a bigger
100%,
environment.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%.
Wow.
So, you know, we try to hire people from these areas, and we're very fortunate to have so many from the countries that we work in, but very rarely in the US or anywhere else are physicians, nurses from these rural areas. That's generally not, where they're from.
Now, tell me why to you, if that is such an important piece, is to have people who are from the community. I feel very strongly that it is, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's worth saying, like, how come it's so important to have community health workers with experience in the
Mm-hmm.
communities that they're serving?
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, it's because of social medicine, right? We understand that only 20% of illness is biomedical, and the rest is deeply biosocial and political. And so the wisdom of community health workers is just wisdom that we do not have as outsiders. So one of the things I always say to our team is that they're not community health workers, they're community health workers. That the community part, the knowledge, the wisdom that they have about the crops that are grown, about how families are doing, about what's happening with the water supply, the rain, whose businesses are doing well, what house has caught on fire. That's how we're going to actually find and accompany the most vulnerable. Because if you just wait, in a medical setting for people to come, you will always miss the most vulnerable who can't even get to a clinic. You'll always miss the, children that are or the disabled mother who's in a bed. So I think the community health workers to me are the wisdom that allows us to make a preferential option for the poor, for the vulnerable, because they're the ones who know. We don't know. So I feel like I always say our work is a little like the parable of stone soup, right? Everybody has something to contribute to the soup. Like as a doctor, I have like a carrot, but the soup, that like bringing things together, without the wisdom of community health workers, we wouldn't have that rich broth, that knowledge. And I learned so much from our community health workers every day.
This preferential option for the poor is, I think, another really critical lesson from Mountains Beyond Mountains. Can you tell me more about
Yeah.
that aspect?
So, I mean, I think the history here is pretty interesting of the phrase, right? The phrase comes from the Bishops' Conference in 1972 in Latin America, where there were a group of progressive bishops, including Father Gutierrez, who just died recently, who became later in life a good friend of Paul's. Um, and they felt that the church had really made a turn, or in general, historically, had really supported the powerful and the wealthy. And they were critics of that. And they said, to be the Catholic Church, to be the church, we have to actually make common cause with the poorest people as Jesus would have done. So this uh, idea became known as the theology of liberation, that to liberate ourselves from this kind of cruelty of vast inequality, to liberate the poor from endless suffering and marginalization, that we have to make common cause. We have to walk the walk with people. We have to drink from the same wells. We have to share, break bread with people. That became known as liberation theology or Catholic social teaching. That was very influential to Paul when he was founding Partners in Health. And so our motto of making a preferential option for the poor actually is from the Spanish, opción preferencial para los pobres. And um, that means that you have to see justice as fundamentally a retrospective concept, meaning that understand that harm has been done. You're not meeting somebody this day who has this problem. You are meeting somebody who has bearing the weight of historic oppression, bearing the weight of the structures of violence in society. And in that way, sorry, in that way, we're making a preferential option knowing that we're dealing with people who through no fault of their own have these forces stacked against them. And so when it's not like we won't take care of people who aren't poor, but we preferentially side with people for whom the social forces have really been stacked against them. And um, we look for that. We find that everywhere, whether it's, men and women who are conscripted to be child soldiers in Liberia, or ethnic minorities or indigenous people. um trying to understand that everybody doesn't come with the same opportunities and the same history, and that weight is something that we are also want to be responsive to.
Wow, that's so hard to access for so many, right? That perspective seems like it should be kind of uh automatic almost.
Like
It's
an
not.
aha,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, but it feels like it can be so much work to bring people to that space, right?
yeah.
Where that's the place we're coming from.
Mm.
We have just a little bit of time left. We have time for about one more question before I ask you if there's anything that you want to promote or tell us about. So right before that, I want to ask you, final thoughts. What do you wish more people knew about global health and working in global health?
um I wish I wish that everybody could be disturbed by the inequality, you know. And that's what I love about this group. We need to be a bit broken by it. Like it's not okay. It's just not acceptable. Um, and if you think about some egregious thing like, the transatlantic slave trade or genocide or, this is that level, right? When you see that, in some places, hundreds of kids are dying, in a village before their fifth birthday, or we have a disease like tuberculosis, which we've had treatment for 70 years, and we're still not accessing that, or there are kids who die of just hunger. I mean, that's just kind of crazy. And there's stuff we can do. I mean, it's one thing to feel bad and feel sad. We don't want to like have everyone despair, because to me, the hope is in the movement. So to have people be knowledgeable and learn more, and then to do stuff, to be activists, to write about it, to write op-eds, to talk to your congress people, we've won through those strategies. And so, we're generally fairly privileged people, um, on this side of the pond generally. And how do we leverage that privilege to really, lean into this discomfort and say, what can we do? What are strategies we can use? And so I think that's one thing. Um, and then the other thing is just the optimism and the hope that like we have won things like I never thought we would win. When I started work as an AIDS doctor in 1990, well, I was a resident in 1992 and started seeing AIDS patients. To want to be an AIDS doctor was signing up to be a palliative care doctor. You were signing up to minister to the dying. And people thought those of us who wanted to do that were kind of nuts, like, oh, what a terrible, depressing. And then HIV treatment came along. And then there was this massive, inequality in the US and around the world. And then the movement came along. And you know, to think that there are 27 million people on earth that get HIV treatment for free because, we all of you collectively, like we all have a small part in that. That's magnificent. That's magnificent. And so to me, we can do great things by keeping our sights on equity and justice and working together for the common good. And that to me is always incredibly hopeful. Like I'll die a hopeful person because I've seen massive successes like that.
This conversation has been such a delight.
Oh,
I'm
good.
really just basking in the kind of hope and perspective that you're bringing.
I love your artwork. Is that yours?
Some of it, it's
Beautiful.
us and my husband and my kids. Um,
Oh, nice. A
thank
wall
you.
of artwork. Beautiful.
Um, Before we go, is there anything that you want to plug? Can you tell us where listeners can learn more about or donate to Partners in Health?
Well, you can go to our website, which I think is great. Our communications team is just fantastic at storytelling and, read some stories of our individual patients that you can find there. I think they're always the most amazing. There's a beautiful video about one of our community health workers called Mabel. And she is an amazing, amazing person. And then, of course, you can donate to PIH through the website. But I also want to say just thank you for growing the movement because at the end of the day, we need more people. We need a bigger tent. If there is one of many, 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 many things I learned from Paul, the one I highlight and think about the most is we need just a huge movement and everybody has a role to play. I met somebody yesterday who was doing ecstatic dance as a form of protest. I'm like, great, we need more ecstatic dancers. Um, so, you all, this group has really given us new hope in dark times because of the steadfastness and the curiosity and the joy in the work. So just thank you all so much.
Thank you. I know that we TB fighters actually just got a new call to action regarding PEPFAR funding.
Great.
And if anybody's interested in getting a jump on that, there's a link in the description, the doobly-doo down below, to the PIH email tool to contact legislators asking for AIDS funding to be spent appropriately. And,
Yeah. Yeah,
you know,
no, please help us with these individual, I was texting with Vincent Lin, who many of you know, who's become like just an encyclopedia of all things advocacy. So we have lots and lots of actions going on, specific to trying to keep the US funding alive for HIV and TB and malaria and other things. And we need to work on that.
and we haven't been without success in that
No,
fight. So,
no, no, we
yeah.
win. When we fight, we win. I mean, this is the thing. We don't win every single time, but on a whole, we win. So,
Um, for more discussions like this, friends, we will be hosting a new live series coming up that we're excited to share with you called TB Ed Talks. Every month, we're going to have a different expert from the TB world come to talk to us about their work, followed by a live Q&A. Our first talk will be on September 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, with Chloe Darlene from Partners in Health. She's going to be talking to us about ending TB with economic justice, specifically looking at the global debt crisis. We'll be sharing more information tomorrow, so keep an eye out. Joya, we would love to have
of
you
course,
do
I'm
one of
happy to
those,
come
or
back. I love talking about TB, so it's my favorite thing to talk about.
that's wonderful.
The
You can
whole
find TB
everything
readers.
is
Oh,
TB is kind of my catch line, my tagline.
everything is TB.
It
Everything.
is. It is.
Um, so we are TB Readers. You can find us on all the socials as TB Readers, but there's also TB Fighters, which you can find on the socials as well. Um, I think a lot of times we get shared by TB fighters. We also are going to be doing another book starting September 18th. It's called The Underdream by Ayanna Masla. The Underdream was written while Maslow was recovering from tuberculosis, and it talks about health, beauty, pain, and survival. It is a brilliantly poignant collection of poems, at once soft, touching reminder that and a demand. I am alive, alive, alive. And you can order the Underdream at the link down in the doobly-doo. So please find us on Discord and join our discussion for more content like this and for discussion about these wonderful books that we've been reading.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
thank you, Joya, for being a part of this today.
All right. Bye bye. Thanks, Caroline.
Bye.